Kids Channel. Kids Channel. Hi kids, and welcome back to the Keys Kids Channel. And I'm Miss Keys. We are back for another episode in our Back to School series, where we read different types of books about going back to school. Some from the student's perspective and some from the teacher's perspective. And today we have a very special book by an author who has already made her debut on this channel. We will be reading the book Thank You, Mr. Falkner by Patricia Polacco. Now, Patricia Polacco was featured in our Back to School series earlier when we read The Art of Miss Chu. So I am super excited to journey back into her world as we read another one of her books. Now, like always, we have a lesson focus while reading. Our lesson focus is theme. Theme is the moral, the message, or the lesson the author wanted you to take away from the story. Things like loyalty and love, compassion, cooperation, perseverance, and so many more. We have been doing this for a while now, and I'm so excited because we're down to our last 2 episodes. And it's just been such a good ride. You guys know theme like the back of your hands. And so I'm super excited to finish off strong. So our second to last episode in the Back to School series is Thank You, Mr. Faulkner. And I know I'm ready to read. So are you guys ready to read? Well then put on your reading hats and let's go! Thank You, Mr. Faulkner by Patricia Polacco. The grandpa held the jar of honey so that all the family could see, then dipped a ladle into it and drizzled honey on the cover of a small book. The little girl had just turned 5. "Stand up, little one," he cooed. "I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you." Then he handed the book to her. "Taste!" She dipped her finger into the honey and put it into her mouth. "What is that taste?" the grandma asked. The little girl answered, "Sweets!" Then all of the family said in a single voice, "Yes, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee that made the sweet honey. You have to chase it through the pages of the book." The little girl knew that the promise to read was at last hers. Soon she was going to learn to read. In 1st grade, Trisha sat in a circle with the other kids. They were all holding Our Neighborhood, their first reader, sounding out letters and words. They said, "Be, be, oi, boy," and la, ook, look. The teacher smiled at them when they put all the sounds together and got a word right. But when Trisha looked at a page, all she saw were wiggling shapes. And when she tried to sound out the words, the other kids laughed at her. "Trisha, what are you looking at in that book?" they'd say. "I'm reading," she'd say back to them. But her teacher would move on to the next person. Always when it was her turn to read, her teacher had to help her with every single word. And while the other kids moved up into the 2nd reader and 3rd reader, she stayed alone in Our Neighborhood. Trisha began to feel different. She began to feel dumb. Oh, Trisha. The harder the words got for the little girl, the more and more time she spent drawing. How she loved to draw, or just sitting and dreaming, or when she could, going for walks with her grandmother. One summer day, she and her grandmother were walking together in the small woods behind their farm. It was twilight. The air was sweet and warm. Fireflies were just coming up from the grasses. As they walked, Trisha said, "Grandma, do you think I'm different?" "Of course," her grandma answered. "To be different is the miracle of life. You see all those little fireflies? Every one is different. Do you think I'm smart? Trisha didn't feel smart. Her grandma hugged her. You are the smartest, quickest, dearest little thing ever. Right then, the little girl felt safe in her grandma's arms. Reading didn't matter so much. Oh, that's a good grandma. And it is okay to be different, you guys. I promise. They laughed. Trisha's grandma used to say that the stars were holes in the sky. They were the light of heaven coming from the other side. And she used to say that someday she would be on the other side, where the light comes from. One evening, they lay on the grass together and counted the lights from heaven. You know, her grandma said, all of us will go there someday. Hang on to the grass, or you'll lift right off the ground, and there you'll be. They laughed, and both hung on to the grass. But it was not long after that night that her grandma must have let go of the grass, because she went to where the lights were, on the other side. And not too long after that, Trisha's grandpa let go of the grass too. School seemed harder and harder now. Reading was just plain torture. When Sue Ellen read her page or Tommy Bob read his page, they read so easily that Trisha would watch the top of their heads to see if something was happening to their heads that wasn't happening to hers. And numbers were the hardest thing of all to read. She never added anything right. Line the numbers up before you add them, the teacher would say. But when Trisha tried, the numbers looked like stacks of blocks, wobbly and ready to fall. She just knew she was dumb. Then, one day, her mother announced that she had gotten a teaching job in California, a long way from the family farm in Michigan. Even though her grandma and grandpa were gone, the little girl didn't want to move. Maybe, though, the teachers and her kids in her new school wouldn't know how dumb she was. She and her mother and brother moved across the country in a two-tone 1949 Plymouth. It took 5 days. But at the new school, it was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over the words. The cat ran. She was reading like a baby in 3rd grade. And when her teacher read along with them and called on Trisha for an answer, she gave the wrong answer every time. Hey, dummy, a boy called out to her on the playground. How come you so dumb? Other kids stood near him and they laughed. Trisha could feel the tears burning in her eyes. How she longed to go back to her grandparents' farm in Michigan. Oh, that is so sad. First of all, bullying is never okay. And you guys better not bully. That is not nice. That is horrible. Poor Trisha. Now, Trisha wanted to go to school less and less. I have a sore throat, she'd say to her mother. Or I have a stomach ache. She dreamed more and more and drew more and more. And she hated school. Then, when Trisha started 5th grade, the school was all abuzz. There was a new teacher. He was tall and elegant. Everybody loved his striped coat and slick gray pants. He wore the neatest clothes. All the usual teachers' pets gathered around him. Stevie Joe and Alice Marie, Dave and Michael Lee. But right from the start, it didn't seem to matter to Mr. Faulkner which kid was the cutest, or the smartest, or the best at anything. Mr. Faulkner would stand behind Trisha whenever she was drawing and whisper, "This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Do you know how talented you are?" When he said this, even the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at her drawings. But they still laughed whenever she gave the wrong answer. Then one day, she had to stand up and read, which she hated. She was stumbling through a page in Charlotte's Web, and the page was going all fuzzy when the kids began to laugh out loud. Mr. Faulkner, in his plaid jacket and his butterfly tie, said, "Stop! Are all of you so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" That was the last day anyone laughed out loud or made fun of her, all except Eric. He sat behind Trisha for 2 whole years, but he seemed almost to hate her. Trisha didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her and pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned in her face and called her Toad. Trisha was afraid to turn any corner for fear Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The only time she was really happy was when she was around Mr. Faulkner. He let her erase the blackboards. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right, and he looked hard and mean at any kid who teased her. But the nicer Mr. Faulkner was to Trisha, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait for her on the playground or in the cafeteria or even in the bathroom and to jump out and call her stupid or ugly. And Trisha began to believe them. She discovered that if she asked to go to the bathroom just before recess, she could hide under the inside stairwell during the free time and not have to go outside at all. In that dark place, she felt completely safe. But one day at recess, Eric followed her to her secret hiding place. "Have you become a mole?" he laughed. And he pulled her out into the hall and danced around her. "Dumbbell, dumbbell, Maggie, oh dumbbell." Trisha buried her head in her arms and curled up in a ball. Suddenly she heard footsteps. It was Mr. Faulkner. He marched Eric down to the office. When he came back, he found Trisha. "I don't think you have to worry about that boy again," he said softly. "What was he teasing you about, little one?" "I don't know," Trisha shrugged. Trisha was sure Mr. Faulkner believed that she could read. She had learned to memorize what the kid next to her was reading, or she would wait for Mr. Faulkner to help her with a sentence. Then she'd say the same thing that he did. "Good," he would say. Then one day, Mr. Faulkner asked her to stay after school and help wash the blackboards. He put on music and brought out little sandwiches as they worked and talked. All at once, he said, "Let's play a game. I'll shout out letters. You write them on the board with a wet sponge as quickly as you can." "A," he shouted. She wiped a watery A. "8," he shouted. She made a watery 8. 14, 3, D, M, Q, he shouted out. He shouted out many, many letters and numbers. Then he walked up behind her and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Trisha knew that none of the letters or numbers looked like they should. She threw the sponge down and tried to run. But Mr. Faulkner caught her arm and sank to his knees in front of her. "You poor baby," he said. "You think you're dumb, don't you? How awful for you to be so lonely and afraid." She sobbed. "But little one, don't you understand? You don't see letters or numbers the way other people do. And you've gotten through school all this time and fooled many, many good teachers." He smiled at her. "That took cunning and smartness and such bravery." Then he stood up and finished washing the board. "We're going to change all that, girl. You are going to read. I promise you that." Now, almost every day after school, she met with Mr. Faulkner and Miss Plessy, a reading teacher. They did a lot of things she didn't even understand. At first, she made circles in the sand, and then big sponges circles on the blackboard, going from left to right, left to right. Another day, they flickered letters on a screen and Trisha shouted them out loud. Still other days, she worked with wooden blocks and built words. Letters, 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 words, 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 always sounding them out, and that felt good. But though she read words, she hadn't read a whole sentence, and deep down, she still felt dumb. And then one spring day, had it been 3 months or 4 months since they had started, Mr. Faulkner put a book in front of her. She'd never seen it before. He picked a paragraph in the middle of the page and pointed at it. Almost as if it were magic, or as if light poured into her brain, the words and sentences started to take shape on the page as they never had before. "She marched them off 2. Slowly, she read a sentence, then another, and finally she read a paragraph, and she understood the whole thing. She didn't notice that Mr. Faulkner and Miss Plessy had tears in their eyes. That night, Trisha ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounced up the front steps, threw open her front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up on the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went into the living room and found a book on the shelf, the very book that her grandpa had shown her so many years ago. She spooned honey on the cover and tasted the sweetness and said to herself, "The honey is sweet, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like a bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of a book." Then she held the book, honey, and all close to her chest. She could feel tears roll down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. She was happy, so very happy. The rest of the year became an odyssey of discovery and adventure for the little girl. She learned to love school. I know, because that little girl was me, Patricia Polacco. I saw Mr. Faulkner again some 30 years later at a wedding. I walked up to him and introduced myself. At first, he had difficulty placing me. Then I told him who I was and how he had changed my life so many years ago. He hugged me and asked me what I did for a living. "Why, Mr. Faulkner?" I answered. "I make books for children." "Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. Thank you." The end. What a phenomenal book. Thank You, Mr. Faulkner is definitely now in my top 5. This book was amazing, and it had so many big lessons. First of all, it's okay if you're different. Being different is a blessing. Not only that, it's okay if sometimes you struggle in school. Some people need a little extra help, like we said before in The Art of Miss Chu. But what is not okay? Bullying is never okay. It is not nice to make fun of someone who's struggling. That is a horrible thing to do. Here on the Keys Kids channel, we do not tolerate bullying. We will stand up to bullying. And so I feel so bad that Patricia had to go through that, but I am so happy that she had an amazing teacher like Mr. Faulkner there to defend her. Now, with all that said, it's time to get to our favorite part. It's time to figure out the theme. But no worries, I'm gonna give you some thinking time. So the question is, what is the theme of Thank You, Mr. Faulkner? Cue the thinking music. Are you guys ready? Good job, you guys. The theme of Thank You, Mr. Faulkner is compassion. Being compassionate is being caring and loving and supporting to those who are struggling. And that is exactly what Mr. Faulkner did for Patricia. He was compassionate about her situation. When other teachers didn't notice, when the kids were being mean, when the kids were laughing, he stood up and was caring to her when she was struggling. Not only that, he took some extra time to help find the resources she needed to get better. This book was amazing, and it's a great book to have in your library. You check the description box below. You'll have links to where you can purchase the book yourself to add this to your library. I think it's an important book for any reader out there. And I definitely want to thank Patricia Polacco again for such an amazing book. Now, Monday on the Keys Kids channel Instagram, I'm going to tell you guys what the last book is in our Back to School series. Can you believe it? August and September is pretty much over. We only have one more episode in our Back to School series, and I am super excited about it. So remember, on Monday, you can find that on the Keys Kids channel Instagram. And then Friday, right here on the Keys Kids channel YouTube, you'll find me and our book. And I'll be here to read to you. So I can't wait to see you. But with all of that said, it's time to go, guys. But no worries. because I'll see you guys next week on the Keys Kids channel. Bye. See you next week.